Hello, I hope you're settled in front of your computer so we can discuss Chapter 11, the Internet and Social Media, and let's get going. Wow, that looks like maybe, the galaxy, or maybe some kind of brain tumor, or maybe a bad acid trip from the 1960s, but what it's really meant to represent there is just kind of the explosion of the Internet from its early beginnings back in the 1980s on, and we're going to talk about the history of the Internet, a little bit about the technology. The chapter itself in the textbook goes on about a lot of really detailed technical things. We won't go into all of that, but we're going to talk about the impact of the Internet on our lives and how it affects us in both positive and negative ways, and raise some issues at the end. We kind of live our lives online on the Internet, which is also called the information superhighway. The fact is that for people around now, that your online information is now being developed at birth. You know, when you are born in the hospital or wherever you're born, the first medical record that is created for you automatically goes into computers. A lot of your financial records end up online. If you have been a bad person and you have criminal records, or have bought a house or done anything else in your life, all that goes into a variety of databases which are now accessible to almost anybody, either for free or by paying a small sum of money. It might surprise you to learn what, for example, I could learn about one of you just by paying a small fee. So one of the things that we have to come to terms with is that the Internet is here whether we like it or not. Most people prefer it to be here because people often think that we can't live without it. One of the things that I want to talk about, particularly for some of you who may be younger and may be out soon looking for jobs or have looked for jobs, is that it's very important that you pay attention to your online activities. So when you post things to Facebook or Twitter or some other social medias, it's become really common practice, more common than you might think, for companies, and not necessarily just big major companies, to do searches trying to find out information about you when you apply for a job or a promotion. If you have any bad information on Facebook, if you posted those pictures of yourself dancing nude in the middle of the road at last year's Halloween party, and that's on your social media, they may or may not like the fact that you are that kind of person. If you have done some things that when they do a criminal search, for example, they can find that out, whether you think the information is long gone or not. The other thing that keep in mind is that developing your own online profile, whether it's through social media or other things, is that your personal conduct on social media and on the Internet does influence others. I've had the experience of posting something that a much younger member of my not immediate family saw and thought that wasn't, the right thing for me. They disagreed with me or thought it was inappropriate, and they called me on it. So I think sometimes we forget, because it's so easy to get online, especially on social media, that when we post something, it's there for everybody within a reasonable amount of distance to see, and then it's connected to lots of other forms of social media for other people to see. So your online activities for work and play do matter. Like I said, if you're serious about a job hunt or presenting a professional appearance, a lot of people go and try to manage and improve their online image by taking out bad information, adding better information. And I'm not tired about talking about putting up fake information about yourself, but just kind of cleaning up your brand or your profile, if you want to call it that, so that you appear to be the kind of person that someone might want to hire. Now, different jobs require different kinds of employees. If you're going to be an accountant, you're probably going to want to develop an online social position that makes you interesting and attractive to people who hire accountants. If you're going to do some other kind of a job, if you're going to be a creative artist, then your social profile might be a lot different. One of the things that also, in addition to basically us all having an online profile from birth on, is that sharing your information online is almost unavoidable through social networking, when you buy something off the website, when you do any kind of content searches, all of that data, even down to the exact keystrokes you type, is entered in various databases all over the world. Here, here at Wichita State University, for example, when I work on my computer at work, the university has a record of literally every key I type, what I erase, what I add, what I delete. Now, do they access that? Do they study that? No. But if they ever wanted to, for whatever reason, they can always go back and find that. And you'd be stunned how many places and companies can do that for your information. So there are advantages, obviously, to being online. You have to be online to be on the internet. One of the advantages is that news is now live and two-way. It's not just reading something in print publication or watching it on TV and just sitting on your couch and taking it. A lot of stuff comes across within seconds or simultaneously with it happening. For example, if you've been one of these people like me who's you're having a perfectly good day and then somebody shares some live event on Facebook and you watch it and it's happening literally as you speak. So online has opened up news to being more interactive and two-way through newspapers, magazines, and of course bloggers and many other sources. A lot of people take advantage of online in forms in the sense of getting entertainment, movies, TV, playing games, not just games where you play yourself on your cell phone or on your computer, but interactively competing against or playing against people all over the world. And not only through PlayStation and things like that, but actually literally through your computer. And some of you I know do that. A lot of people, the main reason why they're online is to improve their social life. They're on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, or as I call it, life in 140 characters. And this is the way they do their daily communication. They don't pick up phones anymore. They don't write letters. And again, this allows people to be plugged in instantaneously to what they and all their friends are doing. Professional development is one advantage of being online. For example, I'm on a program called LinkedIn, which is pretty common. And there are many other programs like that. And when someone wants to connect with me on a networking basis for me as a teacher or a writer or a speaker, wants to find out where I've worked, I have a profile in that program. And a lot of people do use online for professional development. Shopping. I shop a lot on the internet. It's probably a little dangerous, but if my personal philosophy is if there's a local business that I can buy something from, and even if I might have to pay a few more dollars for it, I tend to support local businesses. But if I'm buying something that a local business doesn't have, you bet I'm going to go online and compare prices for the same product across lots of places and take advantage of special Amazon accounts and things like that and other accounts that I have to get the best possible price. Is there a chance that at one point that my information will be stolen and used against me? Yes. In fact, it's not probably a chance. It's probably a certainty that at some point that will happen. Please don't be that person that hacks me. Obviously, finding old friends or maintaining new friends is one of the reasons why we go online and one of the advantages of it. Last year was one of my high school reunions, and we were desperately trying to track down people that graduated, about 1 million years ago when I was in high school. And we actually found some people that way because they had Facebook pages or other online social media. And of course, if we tried to find them through writing letters or going back through old records, we probably wouldn't have found them. So obviously, finding old friends, making new ones is one of the advantages of using online. Research. There's a lot of there's both a lot of quality and a lot of quantity research things available. I'll have more to say about Wikipedia later, but there is some research available on the internet. An awful lot of people are now relying on YouTube videos, both for instruction and for learning about things, do-it-yourself type things. In fact, you are watching a YouTube video right now because it has distinct advantages in how we record and present the information. so that you don't use up any storage space on your computer when you watch these videos. And then another important function of being online is actual democracy. It's getting online and debating issues, sharing viewpoints, and as we know, sometimes those debates and that sharing gets very contentious. We've got a number of issues in our country that people are upset about and at odds with each other over. So, however, that does fulfill an important function of online. It allows people to get on and express their views, to vent, to say really profound things, to say really stupid things, and then move on from there. There are also some disadvantages to being online, and among them is that once you put information out there, it's pretty much out there forever. You could never, for example, really totally scrub everything you have on your Facebook account. You can temporarily pause it so that people don't see it. You can delete it, but Facebook has already got all the information you've ever put on there, and there's always a chance that could come back out. One of the things that I see as a disadvantage of being online, and again, this is a mixture of my research and things that I have paid attention to, and also the information in the chapter, is ads. We went through a phase a few years back where every time you opened a page, 5 or 6 ads would pop up. And it got to be so bad they're filing with some legislation about that. There are still pop-up ads. There are still things to wade through in order to get through other things online. But it's much easier to do now than it used to be. Now, one of the things that's changed on ads is where you may not see as many pop-up ads. Anytime you express interest in a product or content on a website or order something on a website, I don't know about you, but they start tracking my purchases. And so I will start getting ads showing up whenever I go on the internet or on Facebook, for example. Let's say I just bought a new pair of shoes online. Suddenly I'm getting offers from shoe companies and people wanting to sell me different kinds of shoes, and they're very easy to write. Well, they're fairly complex, but they're easy to write digital algorithms that help people to provide internet service and advertisers collect that data on you so that they can use it. Obviously, online there are some privacy problems. People can hunt you down if you're not trying to be found or you want to lead a quiet life. It can be difficult with the internet. I was trying to contact an old colleague of mine recently, and he was on Facebook, but he didn't provide any kind of information on how to contact him. And I simply used a very inexpensive program that was available online. I think it cost a couple of dollars. And by doing that, I got all of his contact information, his private cell phone number, his address, lots of other information that he probably didn't want the public to have. And by spending $1.95, I got all that. And I was able to call him, and his first question was, how did you get this number? Well, as we know, if telemarketers and businesses can track you down, it's not that hard anymore for the average person to track people down. The conversation went well after that, but that was his first immediate thing was, I thought I had some cloak of privacy. How did you get to it? And it's not that hard anymore. Obviously, connected to that, identity theft is a real problem. It's easy to buy and steal information from credit card sales and websites and things like that. Some of you have had the experience of having Facebook accounts hacked or having credit cards hacked. There's lots of ways to do all that kind of stuff. And we hear in the news all the time about businesses whose customer accounts are hacked and information stolen, whether it's credit card information or just consumer information, names and addresses and things like that. And it's not just a local or national problem, it's now a global problem. It's an international problem. Connected to all of that also is the fact that predators are out there on the internet, not only people who are looking to prey on children, but in terms of catfishing, if you're not familiar with that term, it's basically going online and lying about yourself, sometimes on a dating site or something like that, in an attempt to convince someone who's sometimes underage to engage in a sexual relationship or develop a relationship of some kind. I have known people, I've known students that have gotten involved in that, they've gotten sucked into dating sites and were fed a lot of lies by somebody, and with the intent of that other person being to meet someone and rob them or assault them. I know it happens, and those other kind of match-up mistakes like catfishing and just trolling for children through children's pornography and things like that is a real issue. In fact, there are some people now that will not post pictures of their young children on Facebook or other social media because they don't want to expose them to the possibility that somebody may try to contact their children. Another disadvantage of being online is that it can be expensive. Computers and phone costs are skyrocketing, and it seems like things cost more and more and more. And if you're not online, if you're not owning a computer or a phone, then you don't have the problem of those costs of being online. Unfortunately, the reality is in a country like America, where which I call the country of haves as opposed to the country of have-nots, and again, I'll talk about that later. We kind of have gotten ourselves into this buy and splurge cycle as far as acquiring more and more technology. Going online is addictive. I know this from personal experience also. I have a member of my family who literally spends, I would guess, 10 or 15 hours a day on the internet, primarily on Facebook. And we get to where we get so addicted to online and the internet that we feel like we almost can't live without it. And it can change people's personalities. And by that I mean this new electronic socializing where people will sit and look at their phone and not talk to someone, their spouse right next to them, instead text back and forth their spouse from 5 feet away. This kind of online and internet usage sometimes kills conversation. There have been studies that show that it apparently is starting to retard the growth of social skills, particularly in younger people, everywhere from children all the way up through college age and young adult beyond that. And so a lot of people say that it's an addiction. It's a problem, just on the order of drug addiction or other things. A lot of people use online, especially social media, to distract themselves from the real world. And it causes problems when, for example, people are scanning their phone and playing with it instead of studying for classes, things like that. Now, does that make it a horribly bad thing just because I didn't have internet when I was in college and none of us existed? And was I a big study guy? Well, probably not more than anybody else is now. I just found other ways to entertain myself. But there is a lot of evidence that people spend so much time on their phones, so much time online, so much time on social media that is really hampering their ability to act like regular human beings and their ability to get things done in their real life. And we used to call TV the vast wasteland, and this is just a thought for me. Is being online, is social media the new vast wasteland? In other words, is it vast? Is there lots of opportunity, lots of things to look at, a lot of shiny objects to pay attention to, a lot of funny cat videos to watch? But really, isn't it all just kind of a waste of time, or at least a lot of it? So we'll go in more detail on some of those. I just thought you might enjoy that. Kind of makes the same point I made there at the end. I'm switching everything over to the internet. My phone, my bills, my TV, my human contact. So very briefly, because there's much more detail in the textbook, and actually literally thousands of books have been written about the development of the internet, I want to talk a little bit about some of the technological things when we talk about the internet itself. We first started seeing digital technologies, as you know from reading in our discussions on things like music and radio and other forms of technology, started forming digital technologies in the late 1940s, really seriously. Some of the key terms to know, for one of them is ARPANET, which was about a 20-year period from the late 60s to late 1980s. That program was renamed DARPA in 1973, but it basically stands for the particular research agencies and groups that wanted to try to develop the start of the internet. A lot of our development of computers and the internet and cell phone technology was tied to develop a microprocessor starting in about 1971, in which we first really started miniaturizing circuits to process and store electronic signals. And as a result of that, that really created the personal computer market by IBM and some other companies, and later on made the net possible and marketable. Email, the first message, there's a little bit of conflict on when email actually was created, but their textbook says the first message was sent in 1971. It was mostly not developed until through the 1970s. I did not send what would be called an email until the 1980s because it still wasn't really commonly practiced by the public until then. As you know from talking about television, the fiber optic cable started coming out in the mid-1980s, and that helped start rapidly distributing the data. And I will talk a lot more about hypertext markup language, which is essentially the blue link. When you click on something to go somewhere or to call up a document, that's written using something called HTML. And I want to talk a lot about that in a minute. So really, these are a handful of terms that's mentioned by the chapter. Everybody, here's the way to think of it. Your computer has an IP address. Actually, it's not your computer that has the IP address. It's the signal coming out of your wall that has an internet protocol address. So a lot of times when you're dealing with cable providers and you're setting up modems and routers for your home computer, you'll need to know the IP address. And some of them, for example, are in the bottom of that graphic there on the right, like 192.168.10.101. Those are examples of IP addresses, and you'll have something, if you were to look inside the guts of your computer, search for it, you would find some kind of a number like that. So this is how the internet is able to track things specifically to your computer. The IP address is actually the location on the internet, but we think of it as being on your computer. So this is how, if you post something, ultimately law enforcement or anybody could track it down to being sent from a particular computer. Of course, that also means that if you not have sole possession or control of that computer, and someone else gets on there and posts some stuff, then you could be blamed for it. Host is just kind of the physical node that connects the internet, helps direct traffic. Routers, you're probably familiar with that. If you have an internet connection at home, it's a device that acts as a go-between between your computer and what's called the TCP gateways, Transmission Control Protocols. Now, I'm not a computer scientist, neither are you probably. A couple of you may be. The important thing to remember is that, as the graphic shows, there's a big internet out there, and it's actually represented by a cloud, which is where a lot of computing and a lot of storage takes place nowadays, not physically on the hard drive of the computer. And there's various devices in the middle, like a router, that works as an intermediary between your personal computer and the access to the whole web. And remember, that web is explosive. So speaking of that, a little bit more on the evolution of the internet. The internet actually, the Cold War happened in right after World War II. So we're talking in the 1950s, the Korean War. So we're talking about the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, at a time when there was a lot of political tension between, for example, the U.S. and Russia and China and the USSR at the time. And it started really when contractors were starting to work on space projects for NASA in the 1960s. the old way of sending information through telephone lines and by mail, like snail mail, and when companies were located all over the country and they were trying to connect, they were working together on a project, was really slow. So they developed a sort of a centralized network, which is represented at the bottom there. And this meant that all these outlying contractors for the parts of the space projects, the rockets, and even the Mercury and the Apollo projects, could go into one centralized location and get information and kind of exchange things there. The problem was that wasn't a very safe way to handle information. If you somehow, for example, the fear was that if Russia managed to blow up that central station, that central computer, then that would mean that everybody connected to it would lose access to all the data and couldn't talk to each other. So a decentralized network came along, which is better, and in which you had more than one hub out there storing data, and more than one way to connect to people. But it was still possible to amputate selected groups. A lot of this was tied to the various wars in World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and then subsequent ones. There was a lot of worry about if our communications network got hacked or went down or was decapitated, particularly during wartime, we'd have a problem. So the distributed network is what we have now, and it looks like a spider web kind of, and that's why we call it the web. It has many hubs, so if one of those little hubs goes down, there's still millions, and this is just a small slice. There's millions of other connections, so that you really can't destroy the internet all at one time. And so even if part of the internet goes down, there's still no way to decapitate communications or sharing of everything from information about a war or even launch codes during a time, especially in war. So this is kind of how the military started developing it, and contractors started developing it into the current system we have, which is more of a distributed network. Now, who invented the web? Well, it wasn't Al Gore. Some of you may remember, you may have read in history that Al Gore, the political candidate, a couple of decades ago, I don't know if it was a slip in the tongue or he really believed it, announced that he had invented the internet. Well, he didn't. So expect a question about that in the next quiz. The guy who actually is credited for doing most of the work in developing the World Wide Web is a guy named Tim Berners-Lee. He's still alive. There's a picture of him there at the bottom of your screen. Various studies and research, including your textbook, put the creation date at various times. It's safe to say the late 1980s is when the serious work on developing the World Wide Web took place. And it took place at a place called CERN, which is a big lab in Switzerland. I'm not going to try to pronounce it there. My French is pretty shaky there, but it tells you what it stands for. And basically, it's the European Organization for Nuclear Research. Its primary particle collider is called the Large Hadron Collider. And this is, you've probably seen pictures or maybe read about this, where they send particles racing at tensely fast speeds and then smash them into each other and try to figure out how the world works. The first website was developed, according to some research I've done, about 1989. Some people claim earlier. And it was about CNN, the news channel. So in connection with all of this, one of the things that Berners-Lee developed was this new computer language called HTML, which I mentioned before, Hypertext Markup Language. In other words, the blue links you click on to open documents or to transport yourself across the web. Very fast ways to tell one computer to go talk to another computer and or to produce a document or go to a website or something like that. And it literally happens in milliseconds. So we have him to thank for that too. If you don't know of CERN from any other way, and if you like me and you love the Big Bang Theory, there's an episode on Big Bang where I just can't remember his name now. One of the characters gets a chance to go to the CERN labs in Switzerland. and he's going to take Penny, his girlfriend, and she can't go, and then Sheldon wants to go, and in the end, I think Sheldon ends up going. But if you watch that show, you'll probably find out more about CERN and Hadron Colliders than you will anywhere else going on the internet. Plus, it's a fun way to learn. So we kind of call this Web 1.0. We're starting to browse. We're kind of sort of in the Web 2.0 phase right now and heading towards Web 3.0. More about that in a little bit. Here we are in a little bit. Web 2.0, which is kind of the phase we're in now, is showing a much basically bigger input of user-generated content, basically growth. In Web 1.0, it started as basically in its infancy with about 100,000 websites, mostly read-only web, if you're familiar with read-only or read and write documents, and a much smaller cloud. Web 2.0, which is the phase we're in now, we're looking at about 1 billion users, or is that a trillion? I'm not sure. I don't know how many zeros that is. Much bigger cloud, 100 million websites, and now we're going to a read-write web. Much more interactivity. And then Web 3.0, which we're starting to edge into, but not yet, includes the aspect of intelligence, in other words, artificial intelligence, in which the cloud will start being much more proactive in selecting content and communicating with us and linking us throughout the web to other people in the world. And who knows when that's actually going to happen, but there's talk about Web 4.0, 5.0, 6.0. But, you know, we've gone far enough talking about this. I mean, we're kind of in the Web 2.0 phase now. Just kind of to backtrack a little bit about some of the early browsers and websites. America Online actually started as a couple of other different, I think it started as QTech or something like that, about 1983. The book says America Online actually was formed in 1991. That may or may not be correct. I had America Online when it came on in the 80s, and essentially you had what were called dial-up modems, and I have a slide on this, but I didn't put it on, where you actually had to dial a number on your phone, your rotary dial phone, and you would either put it in a set of cups so the signal could be read online, or you would directly plug it into your phone. And that's the first chat rooms, the first opportunity for what we now call some form of social media, although getting in a chat room, it was based on special interest groups or SIGs, was very laborious. The computers were very slow. There was such a thing as instant messaging that came out of AOL. Now we just simply call it messaging or text messaging. But you got to remember that back in that time frame, some of you may, but most of you don't, and that is that computers were insultingly slow. To send a simple message would sometimes take up to an hour. And it was because the technology, the lines were so overloaded, the phone lines were so overloaded, and the technology of the computers and the memory and the ability to process and use processing speeds were so slow that 10 minutes was reasonably fast. It could take up to 30 minutes just to do that. And it took a long time. Everything was text-based. There wasn't a lot of visual stuff. There wasn't a lot of click and drag. You just kind of had to do a lot of typing. And in some sense, you had to learn to write, to program computers in HTML language and other languages also. Another program that came along in 1993 was Mosaic. It's not remembered much now. Netscape Navigator, we just call it Navigator now, came out in 94. Amazon.com, I put that down as a website because one of the most, if not the most important website in America. It's used very much. It came along in 1995. Internet Explorer, 95. Alta Vista, which is really, also came along in 1995, but it really was a collection of information more than an actual browser. Safari, which is one that's used a lot, came about in 2003, and then Firefox, which is the browser I use most often and the one we recommend for students, came about in 2004. And there were lots of others that have come and gone. Lycos is one of them. Of course, Google has its own browser system. But these were some of the earlier browser sites and websites that were important. So you might want to know about a few of those or remember those. The textbook does have some stuff talking about how China is the #1 company in terms of the highest number of internet users. This is updated information once in the textbook. It's current as of the end of March of this year. And it's just an interesting look. China has been in the lead for quite a while now. There's a population estimate, and as of the end of March, it estimates that they have over or more than 731 million internet users. And then followed by India, and the United States come in third. We have a much smaller population, but that also means we have fewer internet users. Now, let's look at those top three just for a second, however. China has the most, but look at the internet penetration number. It's 52.7. India has the second most. It only has 34.4%. The U.S. is third, but it has a much higher penetration rate, 87.9. That means, percentage-wise, of the available population in the U.S., a much higher percentage of us are internet users. It's just the fact that the population of those first three are so different. For example, China and India have much larger populations, but they don't have as many people on the internet. Well, why is that? Why wouldn't they be just like the United States? Well, the problem is something I talk about later in this video, a problem of the haves and the have-nots. People in the U.S. have, in general, a higher income level and more availability to purchase computers and use the internet. China has millions of people, but they don't all have internet access. They can't afford a computer. Same thing in India. India is high though because it has a fair number of both U.S. and international businesses based there. So I think Japan probably is surprising. It comes in at number 6, but they have a 94% internet penetration. The internet is extremely popular in Japan, and that's pretty interesting. South Korea at number 19 also has a very high number of internet users based on the population. They have a population of looks like 50 million, and internet users is over 45 million, so their penetration rate is 89.4%. So this is all interesting information to talk about. There's also some numbers from a year ago about Facebook users, and you can see that China, although it has the most internet users, has very few, relatively speaking, Facebook users compared to India or the United States. And that has a lot to do with the political system, the government in China, where they ban Facebook or Facebook-like apps from their people using them. So this is just, I think, a really cool chart, and it's not hard to find these. I did not put the source for this on here. I'm sorry, I forgot to do that. I had it, but it's not hard to find these charts and to look at them from time to time. Russia is number 7, but I bet it starts growing as time goes by. Has a pretty good penetration rate. So the other column to look at there is the growth rate. India, it may be in second place, but its growth rate is more than 9,000% between 2000 and 2017. So there will come a day, I'm pretty sure, it won't be maybe the next year or two, but maybe the next decade, where India might take over the top position from China, unless China starts putting together the infrastructure for the internet and allows its citizens to use the internet. Right now they're pretty restricted from doing that. But China still has a growth of more than 3,000%. U.S. growth is only 200%. Because, we've already got a pretty high penetration of people. Another one to look out for is number 8, Nigeria, at 46,000% growth. And again, that's an example of a third world country kind of making up some distance now. So, pretty cool stuff. I'm not normally somebody fascinated by numbers or stats, but this tells you a lot at a glance about where the internet's growing, and if you know a little bit about the context of the countries, some of the struggles they're facing, things like that. It tells you a lot more about the world that we operate in. Okay, I've got a few slides here on internet. I'm calling internet trends and issues, and I've used this term haves and have-nots a couple of times. And there is a gap between people who can afford computers, can afford the internet, even in America. And we tend to think of most Americans having a computer or internet access because they can afford it. However, there are a lot of parts of this country where that is not common. It's much more common for you as a college student to have access because you are unique. Believe it or not, whether you feel this or not every day of your waking life, you are a privileged person. Most of the country has not been to college, although, and in some respects, growth at large public universities is flat. It's not really climbing. Community college growth is increasing some. So one of the issues that's been talked about is trying to provide better access to rural users. There are still parts of America where people don't have good internet signals, or poor areas, or poorer people, lower economic class people. People don't make as much money. So there's an effort by some people to try to close that gap. That's a huge problem in some third world companies because they don't have the technology or the money. Individuals don't, and in many cases, businesses don't, which raises the third point on that, which is, can third world companies compete for business if they are not able to get into the global marketplace and take full advantage of everything the internet has to offer? It's a good question. And all that raises the question of, is the internet a necessity or a luxury? To some people who might be a little older, it's a luxury. I work with an organization of writers, and many of them are older. It's not uncommon for them to be in their 70s, 80s, 90s, or even hundreds. They are writers, but they don't own a computer. They've never used the internet. They don't have an email. And there's far more people out there like that than you might imagine. So we now, I think most of us, consider it a necessity. Because you're going to school, that's how, for example, that's your course is being taught on Blackboard, and this is the way you access it, and it's a necessity. You have to have access to some kind of computer somewhere in order to do that. And in some other places, some other countries, or some other parts of the country here, that might be considered a luxury. Cloud storage is another issue. There's more and more of a trend to use remote servers to provide instant access from everywhere. People want to know, well, where's the cloud? The cloud is a series of servers that are off-site. In other words, they're not resident in your computer or near it, where your data is stored, hopefully safely and securely, and locked away. And cloud computing was invented primarily to give people additional storage space that they couldn't have on the hard drive of their computers, and also as a backup for the data that's on their computer. If you're a little bit old school, I still do physical backups of everything on my computer, multiple physical backups, although I also have backups in the cloud for some things. So that's not an issue, it's just a trend. More and more, you're probably going to get pitched more and more for putting your information in the cloud. The third one I wanted to talk about was, and the chapter does talk about it too, what I call the Wikipedia problem. The problem with Wikipedia is that I think Wikipedia is wonderful to get a at-a-glance, lay of the land kind of thing on information, and I'm like everybody else, I use it. The problem with Wikipedia is that it's not always reliable. I don't know if you knew it, but anyone can create a Wikipedia entry. You can create a Wikipedia entry on yourself, and you can fill it with whatever you want. Now, you would hope that you would be accurate about that, but there are many Wikipedia entries out there that are either factually not quite correct, and usually that's accidental, or deliberately filled with falsehoods. And I don't trust Wikipedia. I trust it to give me kind of a quick at a glance. What I will do is a lot of serious Wikipedia sites at the bottom or somewhere in the calendar or list, there will be a list of links to primary sources like where you can go get the original report that talks about what's talked about in the entry, or a statistical thing with the government or something like that. So I think Wikipedia is great for getting a lay of the land and getting access to some primary documents. But it's really not to be trusted, and that's why you always hear teachers saying, please don't quote from Wikipedia or other types of online sources, because they're just not reliable. They rely on average people to create content for Wikipedia. A fourth issue is hacking issues. I don't know if you're on Facebook regularly, for example. You probably, a week or two doesn't go by that somebody doesn't say, I've been hacked, please don't respond, I've got to set up a new password and all this kind of stuff. So that's simple hacking, and then now we have the big problem nationally and internationally with data breaches. Banks and other corporations losing information about you and your accounts, and maybe your social security number and all that kind of thing. And it's become easier and easier. Not a month goes by there isn't some announcement that a major company like Sony or a bank or something their data has been breached. They've been hacked by somebody either wanting to do it for fun or either trying to steal the information. And of course, in the past few months, there's been accusations and claims of political hacking. The Trump administration is, at this point that I'm dealing with, is still dealing with accusations that the Russians hacked into the U.S. election for 2016 and helped somehow influence that. I got a whole slide here to something I call net neutrality, and there's quite a bit of this in the book. There's an awful lot more online if you want to talk about, but net neutrality was an issue that was studied by the Federal Communications Commission for a long time. They pushed net neutrality, and the idea behind net neutrality in general, and this is really a boiled down account, was that everyone pays about the same amount for internet access, and content access would be treated pretty much equally. In other words, nobody gets an advantage. Some internet businesses didn't like net neutrality and don't like it because they want to charge some people more for higher levels of access and faster access. In other words, they want to create a two-tier system, one for super users that can pay more, can afford to pay more to get access to information faster, and maybe those organizations or businesses can move more nimbly and get an advantage over smaller companies and organizations. So people who don't want to lose net neutrality fear that tier of super users because they think that they might be able to take advantage of smaller startup businesses. And the likelihood is that if net neutrality wasn't in effect, that people like you and I, and even universities and stuff, would be stuck at that second tier, and that only the super rich could afford to get better internet access. Now, just last month, the Trump administration announced that it was now targeting net neutrality. In other words, they are going to support businesses. They're going to try to do away with net neutrality. And most of the people who study neutrality in the academic field and most internet users prefer to have net neutrality. In other words, to not change the playing field, to keep the playing field level. And so stay tuned on that. Fake news. This is another term that was talked about in the chapter, actually, but it's become even more relevant. And I actually provided a definition from the Urban Dictionary because it's kind of hard. This has just really been in the news the last 6 months. Usually, fake news was a term that used to describe websites that were completely intentionally fabricated. But now, the term fake news is also being used by many people to describe virtually anything that does not mesh with one's own view. So in other words, is news or facts in the eye of the beholder? If, for example, one political party thinks these are the facts and that's the news, and another political party says, no, these are the facts and this is the news, who's right? And so that's why you're seeing all the fur flying and all the accusations across political parties and between people like you and me and the government about what constitutes fake news and why the media is being attacked for putting out so-called fake news. And there's some actual world examples there that's part of this definition that I downloaded. And, about whether Kellyanne Conway, who's the Trump spokesperson, at least right now, whether she is herself fake news or spreads things, whether the CIA and New York Times provide so-called fake news. And again, I have to say, and I'm trying to stay apolitical here, but this term basically was promulgated by Trump and his administration because they didn't much like the way the media covered the last campaign. They didn't much like the way the media has tried to cover Trump now and his policies. And whether you agree with President Trump or not, Trump has gone on the offensive and tried to use this term fake news to try to say, no, you've got the wrong read on the facts. My read on the facts is correct. So again, I'm not taking sides. I'm just saying that's kind of how it's been used. The future, I just want to leave you hanging with some questions here. These are things that when we look at the facts, the internet and online, we're trying to come to terms with. Says, will the internet help maintain our democracy? Is it going to unite us or divide us? Right now, it seems to be dividing us a little bit, at least in terms of the rhetoric that we see online and on the internet a lot. It's gotten pretty ugly over a lot of issues. And no matter what side of the issue you're on, I think that we can see it's coming from all sides. With the internet, can we continue to believe what we read, see, and hear, or is the truth going to become more and more obscure or less obvious on internet sites? And particularly when we have people blogging opinion and we have people creating their opinions on Facebook and not always supporting information with the facts. And again, that comes from all different walks of life, all different political parties. How much of that can we believe? Is the internet going to enhance the economy? Is it going to lessen political divisiveness? Is the internet actually social redeeming or just a bastion of poor manners and bad taste? Right now, the internet has left and some of the social media has left a lot of people with a bad taste in their mouth. That's where we're at right now. It's like we can't behave as a country, it seems. And some people are taking the high road. Some people are refusing to engage in rumor mongering or making accusations without substantiations. But these are serious questions that we have to talk about when it comes to the internet. I mean, the most seriously you may have thought about the internet is, can I afford to get it at my house or my apartment? But there are some huge major issues that are occurring now and are on the horizon for helping decide what the internet's going to become. Is it going to become for a privileged few? Is it going to actually help us solve our social problems or political problems, or is it going to hurt us badly? And the verdict remains to be seen. That's all. Just remember, on the internet, nobody knows your dog.